But again, thank you all for joining us for this month's CMMC webinar series call. If you don't already know, my name is Kelly Kindle. I'm the CEO and president here at KNC. We're a cybersecurity services provider. We're one of the 58, as I know it right now, authorized C3PAOs, although I heard today that there might be a 59th that just got approved. So that's increasing slowly but surely. All right, and I'm joined on here by my business partner in crime, whatever you want to call us, Chuck Baresh, who's our Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer and co-founder. And
we're looking forward to the call. It's nice for everyone to attend today. We appreciate your time, and hopefully you're going to gain some valuable insights out of this call.
Exactly. All right, so I briefly mentioned, and it's kind of requisite, but we want to make sure that you understand at least who we are for two reasons. One, obviously, pitching. We are a company, we are in business. But joking aside, we've been around for almost 7 years now. Next month will be our 7-year anniversary, which is crazy to think, but been through a lot of ups and downs and crazy journeys to get here, Chuck and I have. So if you don't already know, won't read the screen, but the key things here are we're an authorized C3PAO. We are on the West Coast, one of very, very few C3PAOs that are out here. So we're already signing contracts and scheduling with companies in Hawaii, which I'm excited about, companies in the West Coast. We've got several in the works for Guam and some other islands. And surprisingly, we've even got one going for Germany, which I find funny to come from the West Coast of California to Germany. Kind of seems like the longest possible. Maybe not, but it sure kind of seems that way. So it's a interesting world we're living in here in the CMMC assessment space. We do cybersecurity. We've been doing it for a long time. We do both the consulting side, we do the assessment side. And as you probably already know, if not, you can see now, disabled veteran owned. We're extremely passionate about the veteran space. Chuck's father was a veteran, World War II. So it's an area that we're very passionate about. And we created a nonprofit, US Valor. We commit 10% of our profits to go to that every year. And it's a huge commitment, but it's how passionate Chuck and I are about, putting our money where our mouth is, whatever. We support the veterans community. And originally we were trying to do it just to help military and veteran families in dire need. Now we've gotten to the point with this nonprofit where we're able to help transitioning veterans and people that are getting out. And as a matter of fact, our current candidate, whose name is Alfred, happens to actually be as a guest on this call and tuning in. And so we're having a lot of fun as he's getting ready to start the core of the apprenticeship program, where we've been able to start exposing him to just being out there in the civilian workforce, what it's like out here. He's joined us on many calls with clients, and it's been a whole lot of fun. So that's a program we're extremely passionate about. Okay, so now to the core of what today's webinar, this month's webinar, is going to be. Shockingly, no, it's not about the CMMC Title 32 rule, although I'll definitely take any questions on that. But really, it's about, am I ready for an assessment and kind of what that means, what ties into it, give you some advice, and show you, and actually I believe I'm going to be able to share in the chat a resource that this idea came from. So hopefully it'll be something that will help you guys for any of you that happen to be either an organization seeking assessment, which means you're going to do a self-assessment, or an organization seeking certification, which is what we've been calling everyone for the longest time, those who are seeking an actual third-party certification and assessment. So getting ready for an assessment, there's a lot that goes into it. The assessment experience, if you will, is a little bit chaotic when you get down to the gist of it, which is the actual interview week. That's the week where the majority of the action happens. But there's a lot that goes on before that. And so getting yourself as prepared as you can for an assessment, it only benefits you the most. It'll help the assessor because you may be more organized, more likely to have a chance of passing the first time. But ultimately, this is all in your own self-interest. as an organization. So what does it take to be assessment ready? It means you have your ducks in a row. It means that you have the people ready, you have your partners ready, meaning, if you're working with a managed services provider, managed security services provider, what we call in the CMMC space ESPs, or external service providers, kind of generically, everybody's ready. You've got the people ready, you're ready to schedule, or you've already scheduled, and now you're getting ready to actually have it done. And I'll talk about scheduling here in a little bit. But it means that you've got everything ready. You've got all your documentation ready. You've got your artifacts ready. You've got your evidence ready to be able to prove all of the assessment objectives. You've got your diagrams ready. You've got your, screenshots ready. You've got identified who's going to be interviewed for each control designated. You've got your documents traced to each control or even the assessment objective. In other words, you've got your stuff ready. That's the most critical part, is having all those things ready. But to tie into kind of a cross-side of being ready, because it's literally the name readiness assessment. Sounds kind of like a pun or a take on words in here, but the readiness assessment is what we conduct typically about 6 weeks out from that interview week. At this point, we are conducting a readiness assessment, which is essentially trying to determine if this is a go or no go for the assessment. In other words, go, everything looks good. No go, need to reschedule. So what we're looking at there is, are you ready? Do you have the people ready? Do you have the, documentation? Do you have access? Do you know where it's at? Is it in a GRC application? Where are we going to be accessing it? We'll look at your system security plan. We're not reviewing any documentation for what are the two criteria we're held to, which is, oh wow, I can't believe that just dropped out of my mind. It was right there on the tip of my tongue, but sufficiency and adequacy. Wow, I can't believe I couldn't think of those right away. So that's the two standards we're held to: is it adequate evidence, and is it sufficient evidence? So we're not evaluating your system security plan based on that criteria. That gets done during the documentation review week, which is the week before interview week. This is all about, does it look like an SSP? Does it look like it has the content that we're expecting? Is it only 10 pages long, which is impossible, but that would be a sign something's wrong, So we're looking at things from that perspective and just making sure, okay, we have a high confidence level that you are ready to be assessed. Not that you're more likely to pass or anything related to passing, just, are you ready? If we feel confident, yay, it's go, and we're off to the races. So that happens about 6 weeks out from the actual interview week. Then you have documentation review week the week before, and then you have the actual interview week. So a lot of your readiness needs to be done. This is a very strong recommendation. Have it done before 6 weeks out. One of the worst things to be doing, and we've experienced this, I've experienced this on the other side of being as an assessor on a joint surveillance voluntary assessment, is last minute preparations or last minute trying to get an updated report, or oops, we forgot something, or this needed to be signed and it didn't get signed, or whatever. If you're trying to do that the week before interview week, or even the week before document review week, it's going to be tough. And it's going to be really difficult. You're going to already be doing a lot trying to get ready to be assessed. So the more you can have all of your documentation and evidence ready before that 6-week point, you're going to make life for yourself easier. Assessment, it comes fast and it goes fast. And I've been on both sides of it, and I thought it'd be more intense being on the side of being assessed. But I will say it was just as intense being on the assessor side, which surprised me, but it's happened both assessments I've been on. So it's an experience. And speaking of that experience, one of the things you can do to prepare as well is go through a mock assessment. Any authorized C3PO can conduct a mock assessment and still be your assessor for the actual assessment if, very important if, we do not provide any consulting advice. We cannot do both for the same client, brick wall. So we could do a mock assessment, give you the experience of what it's like, tell you what we discovered is not right, is not meeting the requirements, but we can't tell you how to fix it. So we can essentially give you a punch list of what's, needs to be fixed, so to speak, before your real assessment. Why would you spend the money that it would take to do that and then still spend more money than that on the real assessment? One, if you've never gone through the experience, you don't know what to expect. You don't know the pace of it. You don't know what it's going to be like, what's going to be asked. You get a lot of value out of that mock assessment that will help you have higher odds of passing your first time. That's the primary value in it. So any C3PO can do this. The authorized C3POs are the ones that can do it officially. But we are allowed to do a mock assessment. Again, just can't give consulting advice. So when it comes to getting prepared as well, that's a great step because it's beyond a gap analysis. It's taking you through a simulation, if you will, of the assessment process. And you'll learn a lot from that about your organization, about your preparation, and then the experience of going assessment objective level by assessment objective, not level, but literally how the assessment goes. Control number 3.1.1, A says this. Okay, what's your evidence for that? And going through the whole process. So there's a lot of value in that. So that ties into getting ready. Scheduling. So this doesn't necessarily account for getting ready for an assessment, but it's a very key part, especially where we're at. So I wanted to speak about scheduling. We are getting booked pretty well for next year. We intentionally waited until the final rule came out so that we could know the actual date before scheduling anyone. Some C3POs have done the opposite and they have the whole year booked out. We didn't want to go that approach. We didn't feel comfortable taking deposits. We didn't feel comfortable scheduling until we knew the dates. So we're now booking out our year. Do we have capacity still? Absolutely. We have a plan for capacity to grow too. So right now scheduling with us is definitely an advantage compared to some that have already scheduled out the whole year. So when it comes to scheduling, you want to have an idea of the month you want to be assessed would be my recommendation. And this is how we're doing it on our scheduling end and contracts. So we give an opportunity where the cost of the assessment is the same, but how specific you want to be in picking when you will be assessed only determines how much money is due up front and if any of that money up front would be non-refundable because of cancellation, only cancellation, not rescheduling. In other words, let's say someone has the very first slot in the start of January and cancels last minute. That slot is really valuable. So there would be a, if you will, penalty if someone was just to absolutely cancel and just walk away, not reschedule to another time. So our scheduling, we tend to go by month, and this is part of the flexibility right now where it'll be, okay, we would like to be assessed in January next year, or May next year, July, August, whatever it may be. Then we are building out the assessment teams based on this. And then when it'll come to solidifying that month, it'll be based on the teams we have and your, the client's, I guess you'd say, availability. Would you rather it be the first half or the second half of the month? It's essentially that 2-week period of document review and the assessment. So just to give you a little of an insight into what we're doing in the back end and how C3POs are handling this. An important question we always get asked, which I guess in a way you could say is why getting ready is so important, is what if I don't pass the assessment? There's two ways you could not pass an assessment. The really, really bad way and the not so bad way. The not so bad way is if you meet the minimum requirements, which is 80% of the controls have to be met. That 80% correlates to 88 out of the 110 controls have to be met for you to be eligible for a 6-month POEM window where you could get the rest of the items taken care of, get your C3PO to come back, conduct an assessment on those remaining items, and it's called a final closeout, and then you're good to go if you met everything at that point. That 80%, 88 controls out of 110, there are certain controls that are not allowed to be part of that. All the 5-point controls absolutely cannot be on POAM. There are certain 1-point controls that aren't allowed. It's all spelled out in the Title 32 Part 170 rule, but it's very specific on the 1-pointers that are eligible to even go onto a POAM. So in other words, if you hit that 80% threshold and meet the requirements, then you have that 6-month window. And I think a lot of companies probably are going to have that happen. Some will pass it first go and want to. Some will look at it as, we know we got our ducks pretty much in a row. We want to get it started now. If we end up having 5, 10 controls left and we meet the requirements, we'll get it knocked out and we'll get reassessed and we'll be done. So if you don't pass the assessment in the really, really bad way, means if you don't meet that 80% threshold, what does it mean? It essentially means you're starting over with an assessment. You are, going to have to be scheduled again for a new assessment. I don't know how every C3PO will handle it, but I'm 99% sure it's going to be a full fee because we have to do a full assessment again. We can't do any kind of a, minor assessment on just the things that weren't met. We can't do that if you don't pass that 80% threshold. So you're starting over from scheduling at that point. So now you're probably going to be at least 2 or 3 months out, depending on when you do it. Everybody's starting to get booked. It could be longer. So in other words, really don't want to not get ready, and you really don't want to fail the assessment to that degree. So that's why I'm talking all about getting ready. Now, to give you some more tangible take-home things that can actually help you get ready, I had worked on a kind of a guide on this exact topic, and is what made me think about using this as the topic. And so what I'm going to show you on this next slide is kind of a punch list, list that you can look at of the typical things we ask for and are going to want to see during assessment. So it can help you give you a punch list of what do we need to do to prepare? What are the things that we need to have ready? So switch over here, slide that down. So it might be a little hard to see. Bear with me. As a matter of fact, I'm going to assume it's probably is hard to see. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so that you guys can see it a little bit better. So on this, when I'm done here and get ready to do the Q&A, I'm going to take this file and I'm going to put it in the chat so you can actually download the PDF of this. It has everything I've talked about spelled out plus this checklist. But for now, what I wanted to hit on are the key things in this checklist that will help you get prepared the most. That first one about the assessment scope boundary is so critical that I can't put it in words. If you are doing an enterprise scope for your assessment, then everything is game. Every person, system, facility, etc. And everything has to meet the requirements. That's difficult unless you're a very small company. If you're doing an enclave approach, which a lot are doing, then that's your assessment scope, and we need to know everything about that. So if you have not just a data flow diagram, network diagram, like I talk after that, but if you have a document that can actually describe and spell out your assessment scope, not everybody does this on the consulting side. We do. I would recommend it because I think it's very helpful both on the side of helping your company, but also on the side of being an assessor and reading it. That's the first thing we're doing is trying to figure out what's the assessment scope. How big is this? How many systems? How many facilities, locations? Is this 100 people? Is this 10,000 people? We're trying to get our minds wrapped around who it is we're about to assess and get to know them quickly so we can be prepared. So that assessment scope boundary documentation diagrams that you put together, that's really important. And it's extremely helpful So that's one that is a key. The data flow diagram, I've seen this done so many different ways, and I could probably do an entire webinar just on the data flow diagram. I think I have in the past. But what this is showing think of literally a piece of CUI flowing through your organization through its entire life cycle, from when you first get it to when it's at its end and it's supposed to be disposed of if you've been told, basically you're done, destroy, and you have to go through that process. So that's that full life cycle. So you think of that document flowing through your organization, every person, technology, system, facility, everywhere it touches. Capturing that information is really, really helpful. So usually within our clients on the consulting side, that's one of the first exercises we do at the start of an engagement, because every time we and the client always learn so much about where the document, where stuff goes, where it touches, and then that helps identify your assessment boundary. That's why it's so important to do that. The network diagram, think of two network diagrams. Your traditional network diagram that shows, spoken wheel or whatever, where you have a diagram that shows everything you have. That's your traditional network diagram. That's good to have and should be in there. There's another one that you can do in a little bit more of a, I think I've heard it as referred to as like more cartoonish, but not super granular. But what it's going to show is the asset categories for CMMC. So here are out of scope assets. Here are our specialized assets. Here are our security protection assets. Here are our CUI assets, and put that into a diagram as well for all the different asset categories. That's very helpful. I put a note on here about signing your system security plan, and I always bring this up because it's kind of a funny thing, but it's really, really important to have your SSP signed off on by the executive. And if you forget that signature on your SSP, essentially that could invalidate your entire SSP. Depending on the assessor you have, you might be able to get a reprieve and just, okay, quickly sign it and we'll accept, the revision. But ultimately, that has to be signed. So that system security plan, in essence, we are not assessing, this is a mindset, but we're not assessing the organization per se. We are assessing the information systems being used to protect the government's data. So whether that's people, process, technologies, facility, et cetera, that's all part of it. That's what we're assessing. So having that system security plan done right, that's the Bible that we have to go off of. If it's wrong in your system security plan and right somewhere else, doesn't matter. If you say you do it in your SSP, make sure you do it elsewhere. That's really important advice there. Having obviously a current poem, think of a poem as a log of the things you have been taking care of, not I need to show up on assessment day with a blank poem. That's not what it's about. Your poem, you should have a poem or past poems, depending on how you want to do it, treating it as log of here's us taking care of things. Here's documentation showing, we had this thing and we needed to get fixed, and we put it in our poem and it shows how we resolved it and dates and all that. That poem is more of a log than just a one-time piece of evidence, if you will. In the new rule, if you haven't read this, there's a thing called operational plans of action. And nobody's really jumped on this as far as a different name, but I almost want to call it like a post-assessment poem. I'm making up terms. But essentially, this is ongoing operational items that pop up that need to get addressed to keep you current, to keep you compliant. So it could be something like, I don't know, an update of a firewall firmware. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something good. It's probably not the best example, but things that are always going to happen. It's not a major change to a system that's expected. It's something came up. We put it on our operational plan of action, and capture it there and take care of it there. So it's different than your, kind of traditional POAM. They've also introduced enduring exceptions to help this, where it's something that it's the type of items would be in a POAM before that had to go all the way up to the oh geez, what's their name? I'm trying to think of the group in the DoD. I want to say it's a DOI or something like that, but it's a group that if you have an exception and you want to get approved for a not applicable, that is the group you would have to go to actually get approved for. Essentially, that's what these enduring exceptions are going to be like, are things that you can't meet the requirement for some very justifiable documented reason. So I'm not going to pontificate on those too much anymore because I don't want to take too much time, but take a look in the final rule. It explains them probably better than I am doing right now, but those are two key things that came up in the rule that have been defined and are new that we weren't expecting, so to speak. Have good documentation on the service providers and CSOs you're going to be using. If you're using Microsoft, or if you're using Microsoft and AWS, you're going to want to make sure you have their documentation package ready, their shared responsibility matrix and other items that they put out as packages available. Your ESPs, this is a sticky wicket, so to speak. ESPs don't have to meet CMMC level 2 now, but they will be assessed as part of your assessment if you're relying on them for protecting your assessment scope area in any way or providing a security protection asset for it. They will be part of your assessment. So in other words, they will participate literally in your assessment, and we will be asking them questions on anything that you say, I am inheriting this control, this requirement, this assessment objective level, whatever, from this managed service provider. Well, then we're going to pivot to them, hopefully have seen their shared responsibility matrix that should have already explained how they meet that control and what they're doing on your behalf, if you will. So getting your ESPs ready is going to be a big one. The small MSPs that are out there, this was a lifeline to them. If you've got a 5-man, 2-man, 10-man MSP shop, that was going to have to get CMMC level 2. That was going to be really hard. Now they have a lifeline, but still, they've got to be ready. And if they're not ready, it's going to mess up you being ready. So tying into the whole theme of readiness, yes, that's really critical. I make a note in there about shared responsibility matrix, just mention same thing, the body of evidence that comes from the CSP, who you want to be interviewed. Yes, as assessors, we can quote unquote pick who we want to interview, but we don't know who your people are and why. We're looking at it as, who are you saying is responsible for X control? You identify that and you tell us, okay, this is my admin and he's responsible for control 3.1.1, for example. We're going to be interviewing them. Most of the time, the people that are going to be interviewing are your core 2, 3, 4 people that have been a part of this whole thing, and they're going to be on answering the questions. So we're not planning on, even though we have the ability, if we need to dig further for whatever reason, we're not planning on just randomly saying, okay, pick someone walking down the hallway, bring them in real quick. We want to interview them and ask them some questions. I've been asked that question many times, so in case you're wondering why I'm using that example. All of the technologies, your tech stack, essentially, look at it from the perspective of, we know nothing about you, so we're coming in and trying to figure out who you are and what you're about and what you do and what you use, what your tech stack is. So anything that's going to be used in your in-scope network, in your systems, whether it's internal systems, whether it's some kind of what's in that category of security protection asset, if you're using a managed service provider to manage a cloud-based firewall, or just anything that gets into that category of security protection asset, have that all documented. The more you have it documented, the faster it is. Oh, somebody have a question? Oh, I thought I had heard someone starting to ask a question. And by the way, feel free to interrupt me if you do have a question. Otherwise, I'm going to keep pontificating. That's what I do. All right. Um, Facilities as well. Remember, facilities is a big part of it. One thing that isn't determined fully yet is something called sampling. And this is something that's really important to us. And we're starting to get closer. We're waiting for the final, what's called the CAP, the C3PO assessment process or CMMC assessment process guide, that once it's finalized will give us the final definition of how we can conduct sampling. So if you have 10 locations, it'll be in our discretion, or will it be some kind of a scientific calculation? I know more, but I can't give away more based on just NDA. We'll just call it that. So all I say is once we know the final verdict on sampling, that's a really important part, because if we have to visit one facility in one state, or if we have to visit 5 facilities in 5 states, that's going to affect the price. That's going to affect travel costs, obviously. So it's a very important factor to get worked out. So again, making sure you're listing out all the different facilities, whether if you're using some kind of a co-location data center, or you have multiple facilities, just document. Speaking of it, documented policies, plans, procedures. This should be a given by now that everyone knows this, but if not, make sure you have your policies done. I would advise your policies signed, your plans done, your procedures done, and all that. So get your documents ready. Below that, I list out just some examples of the things that are going to be needed that you're using to prove you're meeting the control. So your evidence. It might be a log, a report, checklist, etc. Forms, screenshots, SOPs, whatever it may be that you're going to have as evidence, have it ready. Asset inventory, that specifically lists out each asset type based on that CMMC asset. And remember, people are assets, technology is assets, and facilities are assets. So you will literally be assigning, if you have a user who's authorized for CUI, they're considered a CUI asset, not just their computer that has access. So that asset inventory and basing it on those asset types, very important. And then I talked about and mentioned the document traceability matrix, which I mentioned earlier. That can be a separate document that guides us for each control or even each assessment objective level. Here's what we're saying is our evidence for that control. You can do it as a separate document. You can do it in line if you're doing, the traditional spreadsheet, and you can have a column that just says this is the documents that are for this control or assessment objective. Either way, we as assessors, we know that we're going to see a lot of different things. We're going to see GRC applications all the way down to just Excel spreadsheets and everything in between. So we're expecting a lot of variety. So you can accomplish these things in different ways. But ultimately, the more organized, the more documented, one, it makes it easier for you because you're trying to get that evidence together when it comes to interview week in a very rapid pace, bam, bam, bam method. So the more you have yourself organized, it's going to make it easier on you mentally. I say that from experience. And it's going to make the assessment and the interview week go smoother. And I would say the more organized you are, the more likely you're going to be able to prove that you're meeting all the controls and have a better odds of passing an assessment, because it's easier for you to show. The harder, how do I put this? The more issues we have as assessors with the evidence presented or what something is defined as or documented or not documented, the more issues we see are like red flags. I think it's kind of typical cybersecurity. We count red flags in an email, if you will. I do mentally. I don't know if you guys do, but I get an email and I start counting red flags to see if I think it's spam. So in a way, it's the same thing with an assessment, is we're looking at the evidence. And if it's weak, if it's not well documented, well defined, that's red flags. What's that going to mean? That's going to mean we're going to start digging more because we're not finding what we need. So the more organized you are and ready, that also means you're much more likely to, I'll never say sail through an assessment, but proceed through an assessment at a good pace and have a better chance of passing it on the first time versus I've seen it on both sides where stuff's missing, I saw a document traceability matrix that was wrong. So it was telling us evidence was here in a certain document and file names had been changed. A whole bunch of things weren't there that it said were going to be there. That created actually more drama, but challenges. So that led to more digging. And long story short, it didn't help them. So, like I mentioned, this is all, and this isn't a 100%, this is the only stuff you'll need for an assessment, but this is the bulk of the majority of things that you will be presenting to an authorized C3PO for your assessment. I'm going to pause for a second while I put this document into chat. One, so you guys can have it immediately and not have to just sit and wait for me to email it out to everybody that attended. So as you are preparing your Q&A, if you have any questions, you'll be able to come off mute and ask them. You can put them in the chat. Chuck's on here as well. So if you have anything, throw it in the chat and I don't catch it, he will alert me to it. So I'm going to take a break so I can drink more of my Starbucks and find this document for you guys and add it in to the chat.
So how's everyone doing today? Any questions, any comments, anything we're not covering that you'd like to understand and hear about? Okay.
So I'll say that, one, go ahead and check in the chat if you want that document. It's in there now. Two, on Chuck's point, this is the last monthly webinar of the year, obviously, because we're in December. January is more likely than not going to be insane. But if you think about January is really our kickoff, it's looking like more likely for us as C3Os, it'll be the start of January. We can start assessments. I can't say anything more than that, but essentially that's what we're expecting. That's what we anticipated the whole time. So in January, if you have an idea of what you would like us to be talking about, think we should be talking about relating to the assessments, preparing, there's a decent amount we can do in here where we're not providing consulting advice. We're talking about the assessment and the assessment process and what to expect. We're not telling you how to pass an assessment. If you do this control here, you'll have a better chance of passing. No, we're not going to that level. We're not giving consulting advice, but we are telling you what to expect. And this is the same conversation we'll have with every single candidate company that comes to us as they're preparing for their assessment. So if you have ideas, we're always open to it. And, we do both sides. So if you have something that would be more on the assessment prep consulting side, we're more than happy to do a webinar on it. If you want it strictly related to the assessment, we'll do that. We are open books, so to speak, and like to be transparent. So, all right, enough pontificating. I don't see any questions coming up in the QA. We're about 20 minutes to the hour. So what I'll say is we'll stay on. If you do have a question and want to come off of mute, as soon as I see you come off mute, I know you'll have a question and I'll pause and shut up. Or you can put it in the chat. If you have a question, we're more than happy to sit here and take 20 minutes to answer any questions you have. If we don't get any questions, then we'll all sign off early. But otherwise, we appreciate you all taking your time and hanging out with us and trying to learn more about the exciting world of CMMC assessments. Being that, Lamar, thank you very much for the note in the chat and all good, very informative. We appreciate that. If you end up having any questions, if you want to talk about the assessment, if you would like to get your actual firm fixed price proposal for an assessment, contact us. What we will do is we'll send you a simple 3-page questionnaire. It's mostly checkboxes. Fill it out, send it back. Within 24 to 48 hours, if that, we'll send you back a true firm fixed price proposal for your actual assessment. It'll spell out everything, things we've been talking about here, the scheduling, the cost. We're more than happy to do that. So Contact us if you want that. And otherwise, we hope you have a great rest of your day. We thank you for taking your time to hang out with us and talk CMMC. Oh, look at that. I was literally going to sign off. Yes. All right, Burge. For the interviews, do you envision they will be held more with the objective owners or boots on the ground folk? Okay, so this is really important. So when we're doing the interviews, you typically have your main people on the call, like your MSP representative, your consulting person, your admins, your people that know this stuff and know what the answers are going to be. They're going to be the ones that are going to be on the call being interviewed, especially if you have it documented like our access control is all managed by this gentleman who's our system admin or whatever. That's the person we're going to be interviewing. I think the only time we would potentially, and I haven't had to do this yet, but we might potentially talk to someone that would be considered boots on the ground, is if we're doing the on-site physical verification and we might ask somebody a question. I haven't had the need to do it. I've done one security evaluation here on this last JSVA I was on. Only took about an hour, and it was a small office, about 3 rooms in it, and we were able to walk through and talk everything I needed to see within an hour. So I would think that those boots on the ground folks, so to speak, as you mentioned, more likely than not are not going to get interviewed. I can't guarantee that because every C3PO obviously has the right, so to speak, to interview someone. But from the reverse of that perspective, I don't want to ask somebody a question in the short amount of time we have on how they're performing this control if I know that person's probably not going to even have a chance of understanding what the question is or going to know the answers. So I want to interview your people that know the answers too, because that's going to help keep the pace going. It's going to save time, So if you have like a security operations center representative and you bring them in for an hour based on these certain questions we have to ask them, then we'll interview them. They go off and we interview the next person. It's pretty common sense when you actually get into the interview week. Yep, that makes sense. So yeah, thank you for the question, Burge, and definitely a very important one. It's been asked many, many times, and I always like to comment on it. All right, absolutely. More than happy to. I think we are good to go then. If I see another question pop up, I'll wait on for a couple more minutes. Otherwise, we wish you all the best. Have an excellent day. Thank you again for taking your time and hanging out with us here.